much for joining me today. I'm Colleen Klimczak. I'm an organizational and productivity coach and a certified professional organizer. I own Peace of Mind Professional Organizing, LLC. Since 2003, I've been helping my clients live better lives through organizing and organizational and productivity coaching. I support my clients and my community with coaching, in-person and virtual organizing, my weekly podcast called Your Organized Life with Colleen Klimczak, a free weekly virtual productivity session called Finish Line Friday, a free weekly email newsletter, and regular content on Facebook and Instagram. I also offer presentations and professional development to groups and companies. And coming soon, inching closer every week, I will be launching a membership circle to support my community with even more coaching and productivity content. Want to finish strong this week? Join me for Finish Line Friday every Friday morning at 9 a.m. Central for a 2-hour productivity session. Drop me an email at colleen@peaceofmindpo.com to request my Zoom room link or follow the Zoom room link on my Instagram or Facebook pages. Welcome to Your Organized Life, episode 141. I spend a lot of time thinking about time, probably too much. For me, the question for myself is always, which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? So did I obsess about time before I was a productivity coach and professional organizer? Or do I obsess about time because I'm a productivity coach and professional organizer? Who knows? But I digress. So here is the premise for this week. Our typical, and I'll put that in quotation marks, can change. The changes can come from outside of us. They can come from inside of us and our lives. Or we can actively choose to initiate the change. And the goal for today is to get good at identifying all three types and also set up structures that help you to adapt to those changes. As I write this, it's nearing the end of July. I have been mapping what typical will look like for me come September. And there are so many factors that go into that. I have been reviewing my typical morning and evening routines, my typical workday, a typical work week, plus, choir rehearsals that begin again in September that I will be in charge of, and presentations to give, and volunteering with my parish's School of Religious Education, which also starts back up in September, and keeping involved occasionally with my local school district, right? So all of those things come into play when I am looking at my calendar for fall. And I keep saying typical in quotations, though we know that not every week is typical. Let's say then that I am creating a template for a standard day and week, because I know that having a template lets me be flexible within that template. If I already know what the big plans are, I can be flexible with all the other components. And I am being purposely vague as I'm talking about all this today, because if you are thinking these thoughts too, right? We all know everybody's schedule is different. Everybody's situation is different. Everybody's typical is different. A few weeks ago, someone asked me if I have a typical 9 to 5, a normal day job, or something else. And honestly, I just had to laugh because, again, what is typical? A normal day job. I haven't had a normal day job in 22 years. Like most of you, some of the main components in my life have changed over time, right? As has my typical. My family responsibilities to my kids and my parents and my husband, for example, those look very different than they were 5 or 10 or 20 years ago. Some components go away, some components stay but change, and some components are added in. Professionally, for example, my Board of Ed work has ended, but in August, I will be working with 2 highway construction careers training programs, doubling my time with one of them and tripling my time with the other, with more sessions and topic areas for those students. From September to December, and I just added all of these dates into my calendar, I will be student success coaching for another cohort of students at Moraine Valley Community College. Hence the recent mapping of my typical schedule this fall and reviewing what is and also imagining what could be. So back to the premise for today's article and episode. These are examples of how our typical can change if we actively choose to initiate the change or the change comes from us, meaning I chose to take on these professional responsibilities. Relatedly, last week, my music director reached out to ask if I could sing for a funeral mass, and I said yes, of course. The family asked for me specifically. I mentioned in a recent article and episode that scheduling funerals are the highest priority. I am blessed to be able to minister to families. That isn't the part that relates to time, though. The fact that this funeral was scheduled for 1:30 on a Friday made my brain stutter. I actually heard the word glitch. It made my brain glitch the other day. But I really got stuck on that for a little bit because that is not a typical time to schedule anything at my parish. Our usual would be to schedule a mass for 9:30 or 10:30 or occasionally 11. So my thoughts kept getting stuck on that. But we don't do a 1:30. That's not a thing. But apparently it is. You see, those morning times have been our typical, put that in quotes, times for the last 16 years and maybe even before that. Our great pastor of 16 years retired in June and was replaced by another great pastor. And I knew things would change. And perhaps this is one of those things. So I may need to adjust my thinking and my scheduling practices, and I will. It's fine. But that is an example of those changes from outside of us that happen. Now, we still have some power over changes, even if they come from outside of us. We can choose to say yes or no to taking part in the change to our typical. I can choose to say yes or no to this new liturgy schedule if I really had a problem with it. Or I can decide that if this is important to me, an important area for me, and it is, I can look at that and say, how do I make the changes fit with what is already in place in my schedule? And that was the second part of the plan for today, right? To get good at recognizing that our typical schedule is changing and having structures in place to help us succeed. Because change is the only sure thing in life. Our typical schedule will change. It's just a matter of specifics. Sometimes we believe that what is occurring in our schedule today will always be occurring in our schedule or our routine or our life, and that is not the case. Our children arrive, and then they grow, and then they move out. There's daycare and school and high school and maybe college. Maybe our shift at work changes, or we change jobs or even professions. As I was writing this, I was going back and forth with a friend and client, and I was reminded that sometimes the world goes a little crazy with a pandemic, and now working virtually is widely accepted. Who knew that was going to be a thing 6 years ago, right? Sometimes our situation, like our job or family, initiates the changes. Sometimes they're initiated for us from outside, and sometimes we get to choose to make the change for ourselves. And since change is inevitable, how do we get good at managing our time and our schedule and recreating our typical? So I'm just going to throw some ideas out there for everybody, including myself this week. As we jump in here, I want to remind you and me that none of these changes have to be perfect. We just established that our time and schedule will change and then likely change again. And I know that might sound exhausting, but I'm going to look at this optimistically. We don't have to get everything right because it's going to change again anyway, and we'll get more opportunities to learn how to adjust successfully. So let's look at that, how to adjust successfully, right? So I'm going to ask you to ask yourself some questions. You might not have all the answers yet. That's okay. You'll figure it out. We're smart people. So first of all, we ask ourselves some questions, and then we ask others. But starting with us, if this is a time of transition for you, and let's face it, most days or weeks are, dream big. What is your ideal? And if we can look at our ideal, what would we want that to be? What would that look like? And let's maybe move towards that. Using an example, I went to Alaska in June, and honestly, going on vacation might give you a glimpse into your ideal. Not that we can sustain that, but hear me out. Yeah, I don't get to go to Alaska again, at least not for a bit. But while we were there, I read books and we hiked every day. So my ideal add-ins, for example, for my new typical might be spending an hour in the morning on, exercise outside and meditation. I'm pretty inconsistent with that at present. And so as I work on my new typical, working me towards my ideal, maybe I'd like to work those things in. I was also working with a client on a needs assessment recently. And so also ask yourself from a needs assessment perspective, what challenges do you repeatedly encounter? Or what problems do you repeatedly have to solve? For example, I need to better communicate my commute time to my family members and my team on my Google Calendar, because what looks like white space on the calendar is actually drive time. I'm not available in that time, and I need to actually track that, and I'm not very good at that right now. Also, I do not always have realistic time estimates for regular tasks like administrative tasks. Or I forget to assign blocks of time for them in my week, imagining that they will just somehow magically happen here or there. And sometimes they do, but then again, sometimes they don't, which means I am repeatedly solving problems and I need to work on that. And so again, as I look ahead, what can I do differently? I can make sure that all of those things actually get put into my calendar for myself and others to see. Other questions we can ask, what's most important? And that harkens back to last week's topic, right? Not everything can matter all the time. What do I want to do more of? And how do I plan for other opportunities of that? I would love to sing more. I get paid to sing. Is that the coolest gig ever? How can I do that more? That's a question. We get to say that, right? We get to ask, what do we want our new typical to look like? So those are some of the questions for you. And now we need to ask some of the who questions, meaning as we plan our new typical, we need to consider who are the major players also in our typical day or week or month. Who are my decision makers or my stakeholders? So, for example, obviously my family members, they should be factored in and we should be asking questions. And also, professionally speaking, I have some recurring clients that I see on the same day every week or month. I have an every Wednesday morning client, and I have a first Tuesday of the month client and a first Thursday of the month client. So I've been checking with all of my regularly scheduled people and asking them now for fall, do they still like our arrangement? Does it still work? Do you want a different day? I have 2 accountability partners and my podcast producer who I've also asked the same questions, right? I see them regularly every week. Let's make sure that that still works for everyone. So we ask the questions of you and me, and also the questions of who. And then there was the question of structures, right? So what are the structures that are in place to help us support change? And a couple things to think about when we're doing that, putting on the calendar time to check in on the calendar. If you do this at back to school time, or maybe it's a, January kind of planning thing, I tend to do it spring and fall. I know that it's going to happen. And so I make sure to make time on my to-do list and my calendar to make that happen. So checking in regularly on your scheduling practices and actually making the appointment or leaving the reminder to do that. Because we want to proactively plan how you want your calendar and schedule to look. We don't just want to leave those things up to chance. The other thing is we can learn from this experience every time we do it. So if you know you're going to do that a couple times a year, leave yourself notes for the next time that you review your typical with what team members you talked to and what questions you asked yourself that made sense to you and what other things you wanted to consider, right? So leave yourself some notes for next time so you're already halfway there by the time that, regularly scheduled calendar check-in comes around again. And then also reminding yourself when those scheduling times come up, what your resources are, right? So I mentioned Google Calendar, maybe a regular planning meeting, things like that. So having those structures in place means that you don't have to scramble every time this comes up, and you can do it more proactively and make it work for you. So thank you so much for walking through this with me this week. I hope you found it helpful too. Support around getting things done is what productivity coaching is all about. If it's time to invest in yourself and explore coaching for organizing and productivity, I would love to hear from you. Please drop me a line via email at Colleen@peaceofmindpo.com or message me through my social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Thanks so much, and I will talk to you next week.